I'm Lauren, I'm an artist, and today I'm going to share with you my tips for beginners starting oil painting. I'll go through the basics of what you're going to need just to get started. The biggest obstacle I had to overcome in my oil painting journey was just beginning, getting the courage to actually start. For years I wanted to try using oils, but I was too scared to start. I thought that the process was too difficult and involved, and I just didn't. But here I am telling you that you can, and it's actually not that difficult. You just need to take that first leap and the rest will follow. So this is my beginner guide on the absolute basics you're gonna need. Let's start with the materials. First, oil paints. Kind of goes without saying, but the way I began, I just bought one of those sets with a whole bunch of colors, the tiny tubes, and honestly with oil paint it lasts you way longer than what you expect, so those tiny tubes are going to be plenty. You're also going to need brushes. Any brushes will do, you're just starting. It doesn't have to be expensive brushes, just use the cheap ones from wherever you buy your brushes, it doesn't matter. You're just going to need at least one brush, whatever shape, size you want, you'll be able to use it. You're also going to need a palette, something to mix your paints on. So what I use is an old tile from a house renovation. I really like this because it's grey and it's easy to mix colours on top of, and you don't get your tones and your values mixed up as you would if the background was white. A lot of people use a glass from a picture frame, or you can buy disposable palette books which you throw away after every use. If you didn't want to buy anything, you could use baking paper from your kitchen and just tape it to your bench and then throw it away after that. There are so many things you could use, like this shouldn't be a barrier. Get creative. Something I've also done in the past is going to a secondhand shop, finding a glass surface, like in the kitchen section there's usually trays or glass chopping boards or something along those lines that you could definitely use as a palette. And it's not necessary, but I would recommend getting a palette knife as well. So I like to mix my colours with a palette knife. I find it really easy and you waste less paint because it gets stuck in the bristles if you're using a brush. So a palette knife works really well for that. Some people also like to paint with a palette knife. So a nice example of that is Bob Ross. If you've seen any of his tutorials, he will go in with his palette knife to create straight lines and different textures to what you can get with a brush. So it's good to have a palette knife on hand. Also going to need a surface to paint on. So it can be anything. You can start with paper if that's all you have. It just doesn't matter. A lot of people use canvas. I personally prefer to paint on wood. The only thing with if you're painting on wood, you will need to prime it first. But if you're just starting out, it really doesn't matter too much. You're just practicing, so any surface will do. You're going to need some form of solvent or terps or something to wash the paint out of your brushes. So I use a non-toxic solvent. However, I'm also careful to make sure I ventilate my studio. If you're still worried about it, you can always use it outside, because I only use it to clean my brushes at the end of painting, so it's an easy fix there. And you're also going to need a rag or a paper towel. I like to use old rags. I'm currently using an old sheet that I've cut up into little pieces. Something you can wipe your brushes and palette knife on. There's also a couple of things that aren't necessary, but you could get them if you wanted. I like to use a paint scraper to scrape off the dry paint on my palette. I just got one of those from Bunnings, the hardware store in my area, and I also use linseed oil, which is a slow drying medium, and it creates a better flow. I also like to use liquid, which is a fast drying medium, and I varnish my paintings. Now that you've got all the materials, you can find a reference photo that you can paint from. Having something to copy from is the best way to learn. it's good to know how to figure out your composition, your values, your colors, your everything. And the only way you're gonna start to feel confident with the medium is by practice. Keep practicing, see how you can move the paint around the canvas, and don't be afraid to fail. Learn how to push and pull the paint on the surface. Experiment with blending and with layering. There is endless possibilities on what you can do with oil paint, and you just need to try out what works best for you, see what kind of style you like to do. Because this is your creative process. It's not about what other artists do, it's about what you do. And start simple. Start by painting a flower. Look at the shadows and the highlights and look at the shapes that you see. The most confusing part of oil painting I found in the beginning was how to clean your brushes, just how. But it's actually not that difficult, and it's also not toxic like what you think it will be. These days there's so many non-toxic solvents that you can use. You don't have to go for the heavy duty turpentine like they did in the old days. So to wash my brushes, first I wipe off the excess paint on my rag, make sure it's as clean as possible. And then from there I created my own brush cleaner. So you can buy versions of this, but I decided to make my own. So all I did was get an old jar and put some screws in it and filled it up with a little bit of solvent. So you rub the brush along the screw and it helps to get the paint out of the bristles of the brush. The cool thing about these solvents is that they are reusable. If the liquid begins to look muddy, you can just leave it for a couple of days and the sediment or the paint will drop to the bottom. And I have 2 jars on the go. When it becomes too dirty, I just pour out the liquid, leave the jar outside and let it air out. And then once the paint inside is hardened, I can throw it in the bin. I found this system to work really well for me. Once you've cleaned the brushes with the solvent, then you can just wash them with soap and water. To clean my palette, I use the paint scraper that I mentioned earlier. Once the paint is hardened, or even if it's still soft and you want to start over and make some space on your palette, you just need to scrape it off with the paint scraper. So it comes with razor blades. Yeah, it's actually a pretty fun process to clean your palette. The main thing I want you to remember is that you don't need to know everything straight away. That's the beauty of the creative process, to learn as you go and to make changes as you see fit. See what feels good to you. All you need to do is do what's best for you and go with it. And don't put too much pressure on yourself because it will be an up and down process, but just keep going, keep creating and keep having fun. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe for more and I'll see you next time. Bye!